Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I'm Elisa Pingel, a marketing specialist at ZenData, and I am joined by Phil Story, ZenData CEO, and Jim McKenna, Head of Marketing of Facilis Technology. Phil will give an overview of our new E-Series Object Storage Archive appliance, and then Jim will describe how their MAM is tightly integrated with the E-Series. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the questions box located in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be happy to go over as many of them as we can during our question and answer session at the end. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Phil.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jim, for co-presenting with me today. 2 months ago, we announced our new E-Series archive system. It provides disk-based storage optimized for media applications that scale from 280 terabytes to 1.12 petabytes and beyond. We're well known for our archive solutions that store content on LTO data tape cartridges in robotic libraries. And first of all, I would like to discuss how the E-Series differs from our LTO solutions. ZenData LTO systems offer a very cost-effective way to provide long-term secure storage for your content. When you archive to one of our LTO systems, the archiving process is immediate as you're actually writing content to a disk cache. And then the ZenData system will write to one or more replicated LTO cartridges in background. So you really are just archiving to disk in terms of the basic interface. And once you've archived to disk, ZenData just takes care of the rest in background. Turning to the restore process with LTO, it's really like restoring from disk as well, but there's a delay, typically of a couple of minutes, while the ZenData archive moves an LTO cartridge, the LTO cartridge that stores the required file, to an available LTO drive, and then moves the tape to the beginning of the file. So the big difference between a ZenData LTO system and the disk-based E-Series is the E-Series immediately starts to restore a file and doesn't have the delay while an LTO tape is loaded into a tape drive and the tape is then moved. So the big difference is they're actually on restores, and you can restore a lot more with an E-Series than you can with an LTO system. But on the archiving side, there's not a lot of difference. Our LTO solutions are very well proven, with over 1,500 installations in over 95 countries. Most of these are used in the media and entertainment industry. Our new E-Series builds on the same software that's been refined for LTO systems. It has the same interfaces, which I'll discuss later. And because of that, it has the same integrations with a very wide range of popular applications used in the media industry, including many media asset management systems. The base E-Series system has a controlling appliance that runs the ZenData software, and it has one storage node that provides 280 terabytes of usable capacity. Just as a side note, the definition that I'm using throughout this presentation is based upon 1 terabyte equals 10 to the 12 bytes. So getting back to the 280 terabytes of usable capacity in the base system, it has one node in the base system, but each node has got 24 times 14 terabyte enterprise class disks. 22 of these are configured in RAID 6, and the other 2 are configured as hot spares. The use of RAID 6 means that two disks can fail in a node, and the system will just continue operating. And the use of 2 hot spares means that if a disk fails, it will be replaced automatically by one of these spares. So these numbers are per node, which means there's a lot of redundancy built into the E-Series system. If you start with a base 280 terabyte capacity, you can then expand it progressively by adding additional nodes, and up to 3 additional nodes, which provides a capacity of 1.12 petabytes, and that's usable capacity. The E-Series runs a Windows Server 2022 operating system and has got the same interfaces as our LTO systems, as I mentioned. The S3 interface allows you to access the storage system via HTTP or HTTPS, which is perfect for remote access over distances of up to thousands of miles. The same content as accessible via S3 is also available using a standard file system interface. And this is possible because we use a very standardized approach for our objects. Basically, one file is an object, one object is a file. And the name of the object is actually the name of the file plus its path. And so this is kind of a very standardized way, which is used by a lot of the public cloud providers, certainly with their utilities that they provide. Some other systems will break up files into multiple objects in some proprietary non-standard way. We absolutely do not do that. The path and the name of the file is the same as the name of the object, as I mentioned. So whether you call it a file or an object is mute. It just depends on how you access the same data. The file system interface allows access to a logical disk drive on the machine. So if you looked on the desktop of the controlling appliance, then you would see an X drive which contains all of the content that's on the appliance. And you can, just using standard Windows approaches, you can create one or more network shares to allow access to the E-Series appliance throughout the local system, throughout the on-premise system. The file system interface supports SMB, NFS, and FTP network protocols. So all of this gives a great deal of flexibility when accessing the storage system. Now, in addition to the S3 and the file system interfaces, the two APIs that are really well established with our LTO systems are also available. These are the Zendata Workflow API and our COM SQL interface. These two APIs are used by many MAM providers for a tight integration between the archive and the MAM. They support partial file restore based on timecode to create clips from very large video files. And when using the Workflow API, it's possible to link multiple E-Series systems to scale well beyond the capacity limits of a single E-Series system. This means that MAMs that use this API can use multiple E-Series systems to scale to multiple petabytes of disk-based archive storage. So turning back to the S3 and the file system interfaces, these can be used simultaneously. For example, you have files being transferred to the system from someone working remotely. They'll use the S3 interface and securely transfer files via HTTPS. The HTTPS protocol is not only secure, but it's very efficient and fast over long distances. The remote worker can be using a low-cost utility like CloudBerry Explorer to write to the E-Series system. CloudBerry Explorer, I think, costs $60. And as soon as the file has been transferred, it'll be immediately available to users on the local on-premises network. It also works in the opposite direction, but that's a kind of a common use case. The E-Series appliance runs a Windows Server operating system, as I mentioned, and it adheres to the Microsoft security model based on Active Directory. So this means that if you have an existing domain, it's really easy to add the E-Series appliance to it. And you've already got your kind of security for your internal people set up. Similarly, it could be added to a work group as well. When accessing from S3, the access credentials make for a very secure system that's easy to administer. The system administrator first defines buckets on the E-Series storage, and the buckets represent the contents of a folder in the file system. So the admin, he or she, will go in, create a new bucket. They will go through the file system, and they will identify a folder which corresponds to that bucket. Now, the folder might be empty, in which case the content is going to be added later. But you can have one or more buckets, very easy to set up. The admin also sets up users. and we have a very easy to use user interface for that. You set up a user, and that user will have an access key and a secret key. The secret key is something that's just transient. It just exists in an unencrypted form on the system while it's being set up. So typically the admin person will just copy that and paste it into a text file and send it off to that particular user. So now we've got one or more buckets and we've got multiple users. And then there's another user interface where you can basically go bucket by bucket, and you can give the access that you want to each of the users. So it can be no access at all to a particular bucket, it can be read-only access, or it can be full read-write access when they're accessing remotely using HTTPS. Now, we always recommend storing another instance of your archive content, preferably in a different location. And the E-Series has basically got four options, which are really built into the E-Series system. You can simply physically attach an LTO data tape library and configure a storage policy that copies all content to LTO. Better still is to connect to a remote Zendata LTO system and configure similar policies. Configure a policy to automatically copy everything that's written to the E-Series nodes to it. A third option is to connect to public cloud, and in this case, choosing AWS Deep Glacier or Azure Archive tier. Either of those would be a good choice, as this keeps your costs under control. You would find that with this kind of capacity, if you were copying to other tiers, the monthly bill would be on the high side. That's public cloud. And there's, of course, a fourth option, which is to automatically copy to a second E-Series in a remote location. And this last option is ideal if you have a DR site, as the performance will not be compromised if there's a catastrophic failure on the primary site and everything has to be moved to the secondary site. Because the E-Series comes from our LTO heritage, which is media focused, it's optimized for video applications. It's also good for non-media general purpose applications, but when it comes to media applications, the E-Series has many characteristics that make it suitable for archiving video, audio, and images. The basic system supports partial file restore based upon byte offset, which means that you can play video directly from the E-Series storage. And by adding a PFR module, you can create video clips from large files. And the PFR module basically gives you partial file restore based upon time codes, time in, time out. And this capability is used by several MAN providers, and it uses our workflow API and a plugin from Marquis Broadcast. Another high-level capability that I want to mention is the option for deep archive. When you've added a second storage, such as an LTO library, whether it's local or whether it's remote, you can basically combine our LTO and E-Series technologies with an attached or remote LTO library. You can set a policy like the following: convert the files that have not been accessed for 12 months into stub files on the E-Series. And in this case, the stub file looks like the full file. It has the same file name, path, size, creation date, etc. But it's only taking a small amount of space on the E-Series disk nodes, and the full file is held on LTO. Then, if an application reads the stub file, there'll be a delay of a couple of minutes before the file is restored, both to the application and back to the E-Series disk node. And under those circumstances, with that policy that I example which I just gave, then that file will live on the E-Series disk node for another 12 months, and then it'll be automatically converted into a stub file. I've been talking about the different proven integrations which we have, and this slide lists some of them. Most of these use our APIs in one form or another. One MAN which is really nicely integrated is Fast Tracker from Facilis, which runs on the Zendata appliance. It's suitable for installations installations that are LTO based, so installing on one of our LTO systems, or on the E-Series. So I will now hand over to Jim McKenna of Facilis to tell you more about it. After that, Jim will hand back, and I'll briefly talk about E-Series pricing and how it compares with LTO archive systems and also with public cloud. So over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Phil. I appreciate it. This is Jim McKenna from Facilis Technology. We developed the hub systems for shared storage. We've been selling shared storage systems to content creation, post-production facilities for 20 years now. And we started to develop a asset management system. And in doing so, we found a partner in Zendata who could supply us with LTO and cloud. And because of that, we install Zendata software on our shared storage systems. And because of that, we've developed a very tight integration with our asset management system, and that's called Fast Tracker. For the purposes of this webinar and the E-Series, we can talk about Fast Tracker in terms of a management system that indexes and allows you to search and find and add metadata to your file. So in essence, the Fast Tracker takes what would normally be an E-Series that would be accessible through the regular file systems that Phil mentioned, either locally on the server or through a network file system or over S3, and we turn that into something a bit more manageable, especially for creative people, and something a bit more elegant that gives you thumbnails, perhaps a preview clip to play in real time, metadata that came in with the file, metadata that you can add later to make it searchable. And these are all things that we can do because Fast Tracker is built for production, post, and archive workflows in content creation facilities. First off, Fast Tracker has a couple different methods of user interface. One is a browse mode. The browse mode is simply a method of seeing all the locations that have been indexed. And those locations consist of folders and the high-level volume itself, cache volume, or the E-Series volume itself, and the contents within that can be searched and browsed through, or a simple search UI, which is a search bar which has saved queries, the ability to have multiple definitions and multiple modifications of searches, searches on individual tags, individual access, individual index times, and all the things that make it easy for you to find exactly what you need. And then once you find that data, you can do a few things with it. We have preview generation. Preview is sort of a proxy. In the case of a preview, it's just a 640 frame, small enough to be kept on the server for a long time without taking up very much space, but enough so you can play the video and audio in real time, see the time code burn in perhaps if you've chosen to do that on the preview clip, and keep that around for all posterity, even after the file maybe has been flushed from the system or deleted entirely. That can happen on demand for multiple clips at the same time, or at the time of index, which is the first time that Fast Tracker sees the file coming into the file system, whether it be the E-Series, S3, or cache volume. File movement and file copy can be accommodated either, once again, on demand or as a scheduled task. The copies can happen to any location and from any location. So if you happen to have this system in a facility that has a network attached storage device, we can index that network attached storage device, copy the contents onto the cache volume or the E-Series disk-based volume, and provide that sort of backup or mirroring of file systems for you with the tracking access, with the tracking of the files that have been moved. And every time we move a file and we see that it's in a different location, or we copy a file, or we happen to just see that file existing someplace else, we call it out as a duplicate file location. So we don't have a record for every file. We have a record that has multiple files attached to it. So we have a binary hash that we run for every file, so that even if you rename the file or the directory the file lives in, we're going to find that file and show you where it's gone. So it is sort of a lost file tracking as well. You can always find the files regardless of where they may have moved. Metadata entry can be accommodated either on a per record or entire search selection or per folder basis in the browse mode. And metadata that comes in with the clip is searchable, as well as any metadata that you add after the fact. Customizable metadata tags can be used, and values of the metadata tags can be used for drop-down menus so that you're always sure to get the correct values for your metadata tags that you're using. And on top of the standard keywords, notes, and custom tags that you can provide, we also have metadata in the form of transcription. Transcription service is available as a local service on the system, and it's also available as a Google AI upload through Google Video Intelligence, which gives us access to a lot of languages, more so than our localized service. Those transcriptions are exportable as SRT files, searchable, and they are set up as clip markers on a timecode range basis, so it's easy to find the exact part of the file where that's being set. When we do a Google AI analysis, it comes back with tags on a marker basis based on timecode for image recognition. And the object recognition in the system, or in the file rather, is brought back to us as a JSON file from the internet, from Google, and it's placed into the file for search purposes. So it's easier to find the file that may consist of multiple images, and you want to find exactly what's in there, then the object recognition is the way to go. Because we have many customers who are content creation and creative and editorial facilities, we also have Adobe Panel, as well as integration with Final Cut and Resolve and compatibility with Avid systems. But the Adobe Panel gives you the full interface within the Adobe Premiere application itself. It allows for import of attached proxies, metadata, markers, and transcriptions as a caption into the Adobe Premiere interface. When you have a media that you need to bring in to the system from outside or from a remote desktop, you can use our ingest functionality. A single button push indexes the local media, moves it or copies it to the server location, and then starts the processing, whether it be analysis or proxy generation or movement to a secondary location. So the ingest workflow that indexes locally and moves to the server is a very helpful thing, and tracks it all the way through, and has metadata for the original drive where the media came from, as well as where it currently lives on the server. We also have remote features, and our remote features are based upon web browser access. And we can accommodate web browser access via HTTPS through an SSL certificate and a sub URL for your facility that gives you the entire database based upon your user account and password as assigned by the administrator of the Fast Tracker system. You can see whatever's in your catalog. You are locked out of other things that are not in your catalog. You can remotely download either the source or the proxy files if you happen to have permission to do that. And those files can then be uploaded again after they're processed on your home system, perhaps, move them all up to the server, and of course to the cache volume in an LTO system, or to the E-series, which is directly into the disk-based archive. We even have a way to do approval links, so I can save a link of a file, send that to someone via email, and it will pop up in a sort of a Dropbox style approval link with posting comments and the ability to play it full screen. Licensing is pretty simple, $5,000 for a perpetual license. We include $1,000 remote deployment and training when we quote the system. That allows us to help deploy the system, help train you on how to use it, start setting up some indexes, and start setting up some catalogs and users. And then every year after that, $990 gives you all the new releases, the ability to call support, get operational assistance down the road. So that is Fast Tracker, and that is our value add for the E-series from ZenData. Now I'll send it back to Phil. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Jim. So I've just got 3 slides that talk about pricing. The prices that are shown here are the recommended end user prices in the US. The base system consists of the controlling appliance and one 280 terabyte node. It's just less than $65,000, and each extra node is a little over $40,000. Now, it's worth pointing out that these prices will be higher in other countries due to the higher cost of shipping. Often there are import duties, and the prices do not include 10 gig or 25 gig network ports. Those can be added as a kind of custom add-on. It doesn't include the workflow API, PFR modules, and the software to integrate multiple E-series systems. But I wanted to just give you some numbers so that you had a feel for the pricing for the product. In this slide, I'm comparing an E-series with a 1.12 petabyte capacity, so that's base system plus 3 extra nodes, with the cost of an equivalent LTO system. The LTO system is less than 50% of the cost of the E-series. And both these kind of numbers, in the case of the E-series, it includes the cost of electricity, likewise with LTO, but of course it takes a lot less power. And the LTO system does include the cost of duplicated LTO cartridges. But you can see that there's greater than a 2-to-1 difference between them. And but of course, the E-series will give you a much higher level of file restores if you need it. And the other comparison that I want to do is to compare with public cloud. So this is a comparison with AWS S3. And AWS has got lots of tiers, as I'm sure most people know. But to be fair, I'm comparing with S3. If I were to be comparing with Glacier, I shouldn't be comparing with E-series. I should be comparing with one of our LTO systems. But if we look at E-series and we look at the cost of S3 object storage, then what would cost $240,000 over 5 years with the E-series is going to be 1.35 million. And that is without egress costs. Now, to be fair, again, I should really be adding with the E-series, I should add in the cost of some sort of backup system like an LTO library. But that will add somewhat to the cost of the E-series over 5 years. However, what I haven't included with those 1.35 million number with S3 is the cost of egress. And there was a recent survey done of media and entertainment users with public cloud, and this is users of public clouds like AWS, like Azure, that charge egress fees. And typically, the users found that they paid as much in egress fees as they did in the basic storage fees. So taking that into account, we're looking at more like 2.7 million if we're using S3, and we're doing a reasonable number of restores over that 5-year period. So that said, let me hand back to Elisa and see whether we have any questions. Over to you, Elisa.
Thanks, Phil. We have a few questions lined up. The first one looks like it's a 2-part question, and you may have already covered it during the presentation, but it wouldn't hurt to ask again. Is the E-series object storage system S3 API enabled?
Yes, it uses the S3 interface. It uses the S3 API. Yeah, I mean, we could have chosen to go with Azure, we could have chosen to go with the Google proprietary interface, but S3 is the obvious one because that's really what everyone uses other than those two big guys, Azure and Google. So yes, it does. So for example, you can, I mentioned one utility, Library Explorer, $60. we quite like it because it works well with our LTO systems as well, where there might be that delay of 1 or 2 minutes and it doesn't time out. But all that you do with a utility like Cloud Explorer is you basically set it up to have a generic S3 interface, and you put in the host details, like US West 1.zendata.com if we were setting something up, and you put in the access key and the secret key, and then you have access to the subject to what the admin person's given you. You then have access to the contents of the e-series.
Thanks, Phil. So the second part of that question is the Zendata MAM platform S3 API aware or possibly NFS3 or 4 aware?
You can access via S3, as I just discussed. And really, for the likes of NFS, then it's fundamentally the same access as if you were just accessing a Windows Server 2022 system with the appropriate add-ons to give you that NFS capability.
Thanks, Phil. And then our last question would be, can Fast Tracker be installed on an existing Zendata LTO archive? And if so, how does it work?
I think that's right.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. We have a lot of cases where we've installed Fast Tracker onto LTO systems that were already in place, and some cases where we've installed Fast Tracker on LTO, LTFS systems that were being migrated to Zendata. In both cases, we can read the catalog of offline files during the index process, and Fast Tracker knows enough to know that the offline attribute is something to be aware of, and not to attempt to restore the file when it goes to index that. And that's sort of necessary for the system to work in the way that it does. Then once the catalog is created of all the media that's been indexed onto from the cache volume, in this case with the offline files from LTO, anything that's online or cached in the cache volume, of course, would come in like a normal record with thumbnails and all the metadata and bit rates and things like that, and give you proxies if you've asked for them. But in the case of the offline files, we'll simply take whatever the stub file gives us, build the directory structure within the browse mode so you can see where everything is, and then if in the future that asset is recovered or restored from LTO, the subsequent index of that location, which should be happening on a scheduled basis, will find it and see that it's online, and will then go into its full indexing with thumbnails, full metadata, and proxy generation and analysis, whatever else has been queued up to happen for that index. So yes, it can be deployed on existing systems, and it treads very lightly until you want it to actually do its full job.
And then to add to that, I mentioned these two APIs, the Workflow API and the COM-SQL API. That COM-SQL API can be used to do all sorts of things, like write a PowerShell script to take a tape every night, starting at 9 p.m. or something, and put the contents back onto the cache. And that will then give Fast Tracker time to create previews, and then in the morning it can turn them back into stubs again. So it's possible to actually just progressively use Fast Tracker to characterize the whole contents of an LTO archive, and you're just doing it in a way that isn't going to disrupt normal operations.
Great, thank you. And one more question actually just came in, and that's, how do you spell the S3 cloud utility that Phil was speaking of?
Oh, it's Cloudberry Explorer. So CLOUDBERRY.
Perfect. Well, great. Thanks, guys. That's all we have for today. But if you happen to have any more questions anytime after the webinar, you're more than welcome to email us at zendata@zendata.com. And Facilis's email address is info@facilis.com or sales@facilis.com. Thank you all again for joining us today. And also a big thanks to our presenters, Phil and Jim. I'll be ending the webinar now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.